Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I have another recent reads video for you. I am filming two recent reads videos today because I've finished quite a lot of books in the last week or so. In this video I'm going to be talking about 6 books that I finished recently and I'm just going to get into them really, like let's not faff about. The first book I'm talking about today is Tales from Watership Down by Richard Adams. This is a sequel to Watership Down and it is a collection of short stories featuring some of the characters from the first book but also some of the mythology, like rabbit mythology, that their stories are linked with. I really loved this. It was really good to get back into Richard Adams' books and to see a lot of the characters that I really loved from the first book again, and I just found it really enjoyable, really lovely. It's a really good comfort read. I mean, there is a lot of action in the first book particularly, and some of that is referenced here. There are also a couple of stories where it doesn't go well for the rabbits involved, not necessarily the specific characters that we love from the first book, but some of the other stories, like some of the mythology stories about Alcorn, I always think I'm saying his name wrong, who is the rabbit prince that their mythology is based around. Some of the stories featuring him have some maybe slightly upsetting content. I mean, a slight content warning there. There are some stories where violence happens to these animals, both from other animals and from humans. If you're sensitive to that, there are a couple of short stories in here you might want to avoid. If you love Richard Adams, if you love Watership Down, then this is a really good sequel to that, in the sense of it is a collection of short stories, so if you're going into it thinking it is just a continuation of the story of the rabbits from Watership Down, then it isn't that. I think some of the reviews I read on Goodreads were disappointed that not all the short stories are about those characters. Some of them are the rabbits telling each other these stories about Alcorn, but I really liked that. I gave this 4 stars in the end because I really enjoyed it. The next book that I read was actually just a very short story called The Locked Room Mystery by Jasper Fforde. This is a short story in the Nursery Crime Division series. Jasper Fforde has a new book out in September and I saw this on Twitter and I got excited because I thought maybe he's actually carried on with the Nursery Crime series or the Thursday Next series, but he hasn't, which was a little bit disappointing to say the least. But as I was looking through Goodreads, I found that there was a short story in the Nursery Crime series which I hadn't read, and that was available I think on his website, or it was linked to on his website. I can't remember exactly how I got to it. So it's just a very short story, a mystery featuring a character called Locked Room Mystery who has been murdered in a locked room at a mystery tropes convention. Yeah, it was just a little bit of fun really, and I really hope that he does carry on both of those series that I love. I do need to read some of his other books that aren't set in that world, but never mind. So that was just very short. The next book that I read was Emma by Jane Austen. This was a reread and I read this as an audiobook. This was the Let's Get Classical book club pick for July and I started it at the end of July. We went out for a weekend to visit my brother and on the way back I started listening to the audiobook because I have issues with being a passenger in a car and I just needed a comfort read, but I can't actually read in a car anymore, so listening to the audiobook was the next best thing, and it was actually exactly what I needed at that time. Emma is my favourite Jane Austen novel and it is still my favourite. It holds up every time I reread it, which is really satisfying really. If you don't know what it's about, Emma Woodhouse is a fairly wealthy young woman. She has recently match-made her governess to a local gentleman and they are happily married, and so she feels like she has some success at matchmaking and wants to carry on doing it. So it's all about her like interactions with the other people in the area that she lives in and like the different characters that come into her life and that she spends time with, and it's just like slice of life. And like other Jane Austen novels, this one's slightly different because the heroine Emma is a bit more wealthy than some of Jane Austen's other characters, but I don't think that detracts from it. She's a really humorous character and a lot of situations in the book are quite funny. I really enjoyed this as an audiobook. I liked the narrator and she did do different voices for different characters, which I did quite enjoy. My only slight criticism, and this is what happens when you pay £2 for an audiobook, is that she kept mispronouncing pianoforte. So if you're familiar with the story of Emma, there's a scene in the book where one of the characters, Jane Fairfax, is sent a piano and no one knows who sent her this piano. Only because this was written in the 19th century, it is written as pianoforte, which was what pianos used to be called because it's from the Latin for loud and soft, and so it was called a pianoforte. But for some reason this narrator kept calling it pianoforte like the whole way through the book, and every time I had to mentally correct it, and it was really annoying. But not so much so that it detracted from the book, it was just like every time I thought they'd stop talking about this blasted pianoforte, she'd mention it again. Yeah, so that was funny. But other than that, it was a really good audiobook narrator. I struggle with audiobooks because I struggle to concentrate on them, but if it's a book that I've read before, it doesn't matter so much. So what I've decided is, moving forward, if the Let's Get Classical Book Club picks are books that I've already read, I will try and find the audiobook and listen to it on audio rather than rereading it as a physical book. Yeah, so that's my plan. The next book that I finished was called Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This one I heard about because of the controversy around the reading rush, which I didn't take part in, but this was the group book for that readathon, and so when they were talking about it, with all the stuff that happened with Reading Rush, which I'm not going to go into because I wasn't involved, I didn't take part in Reading Rush, I never have. I know a lot of people were quite upset by it, but I don't feel like I can have an opinion on it because it didn't affect me directly. But the positive for me was that I heard about this book, Such a Fun Age, and was just really intrigued by it, and I was able to get it as an ebook from the library. So this is about a young woman called Amira Tucker, and she works a couple of days a week as a nanny or babysitter for quite a wealthy white family. She's a black young woman. One evening she's out with her friends and she gets a call from the mum of the family to say they've had an incident in the house and can she come and just keep an eye on Briar, the little girl, for a little bit while they try and sort it out. So Amira goes, and it's about like midnight, and she takes Briar to a local supermarket and they're just hanging out there when she gets stopped by a security guard because he thinks she's kidnapped the child. The story develops from there. There's a young man there at the time who films what happens, and then he stays in touch with Amira and they start dating, and it turns out he has history with her employer. It goes into the backstories of these different characters a little bit and all their relationships. It's really a novel about performative allyship. Both her employer and her boyfriend are both trying to tell Amira what's the right thing for her to do and not letting her actually make that decision for herself. It was really a good thing to read, having recently read books like White Rage and White Fragility, and to be thinking about these themes of what does that actually mean to be an ally. Both Alex, the boss, and Kelly, the boyfriend, would have called themselves allies to Amira, but actually the way they act shows that they aren't really. There was a lot in there that really made me think. There's a scene from Alex's past where she kind of exemplifies this idea of white women's tears, which Robin DiAngelo talks about in White Fragility. It was really interesting to see like a concrete example of that. I know it's a fiction novel, but to actually see a situation where that was exemplified, and like I could understand where Alex was coming from in a lot of the situations, and I think in some ways I'm quite a similar character type to Alex. Like, she's a bit of a control freak and I know I can be that way as well, so it was really interesting to see how that can actually be a really negative thing. Like, if it comes down to like making things run smoothly in my own life, that's fine, but as soon as I start trying to impact on other people's lives, that's not okay. And to see that so blatantly in that character, like, and I had a lot of sympathy for her actually, and for most of the characters, and I think I read an article or an interview with Kylie Reid, and she said she doesn't want people to dislike Alex, but she does want them to kind of understand the dynamics of that relationship, and I think that was, yeah, it was a really good example of what performative allyship is and how unhelpful it is really. So yeah, I really enjoyed that book. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. Okay, and then the next book that I finished was Kingdom of Copper by S.A. Chakraborty. This is the second book in the Davabad trilogy. I'm never quite sure if I'm saying it, if it's meant to be Davabad or Davabad. I never am quite sure. I really loved this book. I can't really talk about what happens in this book because it's a sequel and I don't want to give away spoilers for the first book, but it carries on from the story of the first book, which is called City of Brass, The City of Brass. In the first book, a young woman called Nari, who's grown up as an orphan in Cairo, accidentally summons a jinn or a deva and finds herself taken to the city of Davabad, where she learns more about her heritage and gets sucked into a lot of court politics and all that sort of thing. And this book takes place 5 years after the events of the first book, where things have moved on quite a lot, but a lot of the situations are still very similar. There's still a lot of dangerous things that go on. There's quite a bit of violence in this book, as there was in the first book, and just the last 200 pages were just a complete emotional roller coaster. There were so many plots, and I mean plots in the sense of intrigues, like court plotting, not just in terms of storylines. There were moments where I was like, okay, so who's in danger from whom now? Because like it seemed like at one point everyone was trying to kill everyone else. There were several moments where I was like, not everyone is going to survive the story, are they? Yeah, so well done S.A. Chakraborty for really playing with my emotions there. I'm really keen to finish this series. There's one book left, The Empire of Gold, but my heart needs a bit of a break before I do carry on with that. Content warnings in this book for like violent death, poisoning, I want to say domestic violence or domestic abuse. There's certainly emotional abuse. What I will do for this book and for all the books I've talked about is I will link to the Book Trigger Warnings website entries for any of the books that are featured on that site. So if I missed any content warnings, you can go and find them quite easily on that site. I think mainly just there is a lot of on-the-page violence in these books. If that's something you're sensitive to, like I'm quite squeamish, and it wasn't that graphic in one sense, but actually some of the storylines were a bit upsetting to me, and I think that's just because of the emotional engagement with the characters. But really love this series, and so I don't want to put people off, but if you don't like a lot of violence, then just be aware before you go in that there is some violence in these books. There's like several uprisings in this particular book, and people get hurt in those. So yeah, I think that's everything I want to say about this one. I just really love the series, and I'm really keen to finish it this year, hopefully. So I gave this one 5 stars, obviously. And then the final book that I'm going to be talking about today is Grace by Brandy Alcorn. This is a collection of like daily readings. There's a Bible verse, and then a reflection on it, and then a quote. I've been reading this for a little while because it's like a 1 a day thing. So I've been reading roughly 1 a day for the last, not quite year. I think I started October of last year. Didn't remember to read it every day. Some really lovely thoughts and prayers in here, but not something I'm going to reread, so I will be passing it on to a charity shop or something. I'm going to be unhauling it, but it was quite enjoyable. I don't really have a lot to say about it. That was 6 books that I have finished recently. Let me know if you've read any of them and what you thought of them. Particularly if you are reading or have read the Davabad trilogy, I'd love to know like your thoughts, but don't spoil Empire of Gold for me. So please like this video if you liked it, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and you can also follow me on my social media if you'd like more up-to-date info about what I'm reading. Then check out my Goodreads. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, and on Instagram I do a mini review of every book that I read, so go and check those out if you'd like to know more about what I'm reading. All that information is in the description box below for you. But that's it for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!